Imagine waking up one day and realizing 8 years of your life have just vanished, not lost, but stolen. The heavy iron gates of the maximum security prison screamed open, and for the first time in nearly a decade, the sun hit my face. I wasn't Imani Dio, the happy 30-year-old wife anymore. I was Imani Dio, the convicted killer of her own husband. But as I stepped out with nothing but a duffel bag and an envelope of cash earned from sewing prison uniforms, I made a promise to myself. I wasn't just going to survive. I was going to find out why my life was destroyed. I clutched my entire fortune, $30,000 saved penny by penny in the garment workshop, and walked toward the bus stop. Every step felt heavy. Physically, I was free, but morally, I was still trapped in that nightmare from 8 years ago. It played in my head like a broken record. The fight with Cairo about money, the smell of alcohol on his breath, the way he snapped at me, and then darkness. I remember a sharp pain in the back of my head, and the next thing I knew there were sirens. They found him on the floor in a pool of blood, a fireplace poker next to him. They said I did it in a moment of passion. My lawyer was useless, and just like that, I was sentenced for involuntary manslaughter. I sat on the bus, watching the city roll by. The driver, an older man with kind eyes, told me my life was just starting. If only he knew. My parents were gone. My apartment was long lost, and the husband I was accused of killing was 6 feet under. Or so I thought. My first stop wasn't a hotel or a restaurant. It was a flower shop. I bought 6 simple white chrysanthemums. It was all I could afford. Then I took 2 buses to the edge of the city, to Oakwood Memorial Park. Walking through those cemeteries' gates felt surreal. I found the plot in a distant, cheap corner. The metal plaque read, "Cairo Dio, beloved husband." I let out a bitter laugh. Beloved. If only people knew the truth about our crumbling marriage. The grave was a mess, covered in weeds. No one had visited him in 8 years. As I knelt to clean the dirt off his name, I felt eyes on me. The sun was setting, casting long, creepy shadows, and I realized I wasn't alone. I turned around and saw a small figure duck behind a tombstone. It was a little girl, maybe 6 years old, with blonde pigtails and big, curious gray eyes. "Hello?" I called out softly. "I won't bite." She hesitated but stepped out. Her name was Lumi. She told me she lived on the cemetery grounds with her dad, Victor, the caretaker. It broke my heart a little, a child growing up among graves. I offered her a piece of candy and we started talking. "My dad's been here 5 years, Lumi said, munching on the sweet. "But before him, Grandpa Nick worked here. He told lots of scary stories." I smiled, thinking it was just childish imagination. "Scary stories about ghosts?" Lumi shook her head, her face suddenly serious. She looked at my husband's grave, then back at me. "Not ghosts. Grandpa Nick told Daddy that some graves here are strange. He said that not everything that should be inside them is actually inside them." My blood ran cold. A child's nonsense? Maybe. But then Lumi leaned in close, whispering like she was sharing a dangerous secret. "Auntie, do you want to know a secret? Daddy saw men come here at night. They dug right here, where your husband is. And he said they took something out." My hands started to tremble. If someone opened Cairo's grave, what were they looking for? And if they took something out, who or what is actually in that coffin? Have you ever heard a secret so dangerous it made you want to run? When a 6-year-old girl told me my husband's grave had been dug up in the middle of the night, I didn't run. I froze. If that grave was empty, or if someone had taken something out of it, then everything I suffered for, the prison, the shame, the lost years, was based on a lie. I needed answers, and I needed to stay right here until I got them. "Daddy!" Lumi shouted, breaking the tension. A stocky man in blue overalls walked toward us. This was Victor, the current groundskeeper. He had the tired, suspicious eyes of a single father trying to protect his kid. He looked at me, then at the grave, then back at me. "I'm Imani," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I was just visiting my husband." I pointed to the headstone. I needed a reason to stay at the cemetery without raising suspicion. I took a gamble. "I'm looking for work," I lied smoothly. "I can clean, water flowers, anything. I just need a start." Victor looked me up and down. He saw the worn clothes, the desperation. He didn't know I was an ex-convict, just that I was broke. "It's not high pay," he grunted. "But show up tomorrow at 8 a.m. We'll try it for a week." The next day, I raked leaves and scrubbed headstones until my hands ached. But my mind was racing. I waited until the cemetery was quiet, just the wind whistling through the trees, before I cornered Victor. "Victor," I asked casually, "Lumi said something strange yesterday about people coming here at night." Victor stopped sweeping. His back stiffened. "Kids have wild imaginations," he muttered, not looking at me. "She said men paid you to look the other way while they opened a grave." I pressed, stepping closer. "My husband's grave." He dropped the broom. For a second I thought he might kick me out. Instead, he slumped, the guilt clearly eating him alive. "Imani, look, I have a daughter to raise alone," he whispered. "They offered me more money than I make in a year, just to take a walk for 2 hours. I didn't ask questions. When I came back, the grave was closed up like nothing happened. So it was true. Someone had tampered with Cairo's grave. But why? That evening, I went to the public library. I needed to know what happened to the world while I was locked away. I pulled up the digital newspaper archives from 8 years ago, the year my life ended. I found the article about the murder first. "Domestic dispute leaves man dead." Standard headline. But then I kept scrolling, looking for anything else involving Cairo. That's when I saw it. Exactly 1 month after Cairo supposedly died, there was another headline. "Bank of the Americas robbed. $50 million stolen." My heart hammered against my ribs. That was Cairo's bank. He was the branch manager. The article said the robbers knew the security system perfectly. The cameras were disabled, the alarms bypassed from the inside. I stared at the screen, connecting the dots that the police had missed. Cairo dies. A month later, his bank is robbed by someone who knows his codes. And years later, men are digging up his grave. A terrifying thought clawed its way into my brain. What if Cairo wasn't the victim? What if my husband wasn't just a gambling addict who got killed, but the mastermind who got away? The perfect crime doesn't just require a mastermind. It requires a scapegoat. For 8 years, I thought I was paying for a tragic accident. But as I stared at those newspaper archives in my cheap motel room, the ugly truth started to take shape. Cairo didn't die because of a domestic dispute. He died, or pretended to die, so he could disappear with $50 million. I was just the distraction. But if my husband was alive, living off the fortune that cost me my freedom, I was going to hunt him down. The next morning, I went back to the cemetery with a new purpose. I needed to know exactly who opened that grave. I found Victor near the tool shed and pressed him for details. "The men who paid you," I asked, "what did they look like?" Victor glanced around nervously before whispering. "Two of them. One was short and stocky, wearing a leather jacket. The other one, he was the one in charge. Tall, thin, expensive suit." He tapped his own face. He had a big mole right here on his cheek, hard to miss. "And they said they were relatives?" "They said it was a family matter," Victor replied. "But they didn't look like family. They looked like professionals." Tall man, mole on his cheek. I filed that away. These weren't grieving relatives. They were cleaners. I needed to retrace my steps back to the day of the murder. I took a bus to my old apartment building on Park Avenue. It looked more run down than I remembered. I knocked on the door of 2B, praying Valentina was still there. She was. My old neighbor was frailer now, but her mind was sharp. She gasped when she saw me, pulling me into a hug. Over tea, I asked the question that had been haunting me. "Valentina, think back to that night. Did anyone visit us before the fight?" She frowned, thinking. Yes, I remember. A man came in the afternoon, dressed nicely in a suit. He didn't stay long, maybe half an hour. Then he left in a dark car. "Do you remember who it was?" "I didn't see his face clearly," she said. "But I remember that business partner of Cairo's used to come around. Maxwell Theron. Nasty man. Always looked like he was scheming." Maxwell Theron, Cairo's partner in investments. If anyone knew what Cairo was planning, it was him. I tracked down Theron's old office address in the business district. When I got there, the company was long gone, replaced by an advertising agency. But I wasn't giving up. I went door to door in the hallway until I found an accountant in a neighboring office who remembered him. "Theron?" the woman scoffed. "He closed up shop overnight about 4 years ago. Vanished. Rumor has it he fled the country right after the police started asking questions about that big bank robbery." My stomach dropped. Theron fled right after the robbery investigation started. Cairo died right before it happened. They were working together, but then the accountant leaned in, lowering her voice. You know, there was a young girl, a junior bookkeeper named Elena, who used to work for him. She saw things. I heard she kept some of the old files before she left. If Elena had Theron's old files, she might have the smoking gun I needed. But as I walked out of the building, I got a prickling feeling on the back of my neck. I turned around and saw a black SUV idling across the street. Inside, a tall man turned to look at me. Even from a distance, I could see the dark mole on his cheek. Paranoia is a heavy coat to wear, especially when you know it's justified. Walking away from that office building, feeling the eyes of the man in the black SUV burning into my back, I realized the clock was ticking. I wasn't just a woman looking for answers anymore. I was a loose end that someone was trying to tie up. I had to find Elena, the accountant who saw too much, before the men in the black car found me. It took me 2 agonizing days of searching. I visited every accounting firm and temp agency in the district, dodging questions and fake smiling at receptionists. Finally, I got a hit. An auditing firm confirmed that Elena Vasquez worked there, but was out at a client site. I waited. When she finally walked in the next day, she looked young, professional, and completely unaware that her old boss was a criminal. I cornered her during her lunch break at a cafe across the street. "My name is Imani Dio," I said, dropping the bomb immediately. Her coffee cup rattled against the saucer. "The Imani Dio? The one from the papers?" "I didn't kill him, Elena, and I think your old boss, Maxwell Theron, knows who did." Elena looked around nervously, lowering her voice. Curiosity won over fear. She told me that working for Theron was a nightmare. "Maxwell was paranoid," she whispered, "especially right before he closed the company. He was shredding documents by the boxload, contracts, bank certificates, everything. Did you see anything specific?" I asked, leaning in. "I saw him on the phone a lot," she said, her eyes wide. "A few days before your husband died, Maxwell was arguing with someone. I heard him say the name Dio multiple times. He said, 'Dio agrees. Dio will fix it.' I felt the air leave my lungs. My husband was supposedly days away from being murdered, yet he was plotting with Theron on the phone. And, Elena added, he had a massive loan with the Bank of the Americas, like $20 million. He vanished the second the police started investigating the robbery. It was the confirmation I needed. Theron and Cairo staged the robbery. But something went wrong, or maybe right according to their plan, and I took the fall. I left Elena with a promise to stay in touch and headed back to the cemetery for my evening shift. My head was spinning with plans to find Theron, but when I got to the gates, the atmosphere was wrong. Victor, usually calm, was pacing by the shed. He looked pale, sweat beading on his forehead. "What happened?" I asked. "People were here," he stammered, looking over his shoulder. "2 men. They were asking about you, Imani. Not about the job, but about you, where you live, who you talk to." I grabbed his arm. "Victor, listen to me. Was one of them tall, with a mole on his cheek?" Victor's eyes went wide. "How did you know?" "Yes, that's him. And the other one was the stocky guy in the leather jacket." My heart stopped. These were the same men who dug up the grave. They weren't just watching me from a distance anymore. They had walked right up to my workplace. They knew where I was, and if they were asking questions, it meant they were getting ready to silence me permanently. They say curiosity kills the cat, but in my case, it almost killed the only friend I had left. I knew I was playing a dangerous game by digging into Cairo's past, but I never expected the people hunting me to target an innocent groundskeeper just to get to me. I walked into the cemetery the next morning expecting answers, but instead I found a crime scene waiting to happen. I arrived at the cemetery gates to the sound of crying. Lumi was standing by the tool shed, tears streaming down her face. "Daddy won't wake up," she sobbed. I rushed inside the small caretaker's house. Victor was lying on his bed, pale as a sheet, sweating and mumbling nonsense about money and tea. I called an ambulance immediately. The paramedics took one look at his dilated pupils and said it looked like severe poisoning. Later at the hospital, a weak Victor grabbed my hand. "They came back," he whispered. "Those men, they offered me tea, said they were tired from traveling. Then they told me if I kept talking about the grave, Lumi would get hurt." My blood boiled. They poisoned him to get him out of the way so they could get to me. Victor begged me to leave the city, but I couldn't run. Not now. The next morning I went back to the cemetery alone. I had to get my things and disappear. But as I was packing near the shed, a black SUV rolled slowly down the perimeter road. I ducked behind a large marble headstone just as the car stopped at the main gate. Two men got out, the tall one with the mole and the stocky one in the leather jacket. My heart hammered against my ribs as I listened to them. The tall man was on the phone. "She works here. The groundskeeper is in the hospital. We can make our move." I was trapped. They were blocking the main exit. I crept toward the back service gate, hoping to slip out, but my stomach dropped. A third man was standing guard there. I was completely surrounded with nowhere to run. Just as panic set in, I heard a voice. "Imani." It was Elena, the accountant. She had walked in through the open main gate, right past the killers, looking for me. "Quiet!" I hissed, pulling her behind a monument. "Those men are here to kill me." Elena's eyes went wide, but she didn't scream. "I have a car," she whispered. "Listen," I said rapidly. "Go back to the gate. Distract them. Tell them you need a death certificate for a relative. Just give me 2 minutes." Elena nodded, terrified but brave, and walked back toward the men. I watched as she started arguing with them, waving some papers. Seizing the chance, I sprinted to a low section of the fence in the far corner. I scrambled over, tearing my clothes and scraping my hands, but I hit the pavement on the other side, just as Elena's car pulled up. We sped away, leaving the city limits before I finally exhaled. "Why did you come back?" I asked, trembling. Elena gripped the steering wheel. "I couldn't stop thinking about what you said, about Maxwell Theron destroying documents." She glanced at me, a strange look on her face. "He didn't destroy all of them, Imani. I kept a folder at home."
She reached into the back seat and handed me a stack of papers. "There's a letter in there from a man named Alex Romano to Maxwell. It's dated the same month your husband died." I opened the folder. The letter detailed a plan for an accident and a bank operation. But the chilling part was the last line. Don't forget our agreement about the grave. In a few years, it will be necessary to retrieve important documents from there. There is a specific kind of cold that hits you when you realize the person you mourned for 8 years never actually died. Sitting in Elena's small apartment, holding a letter signed by Alex Romano, I didn't feel relief. I felt a rage so hot it could burn a hole through steel. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was Kairos. My husband wasn't a victim. He was a ghost who had walked away with millions, leaving me to rot in a cell for a murder that never happened. But if Cairo was alive sipping cocktails somewhere in Europe, then who or what was rotting in his grave? Do you understand what this means? I asked Elena, my voice shaking. Cairo faked his death. He became Alex Romano to rob the bank and escape. Elena looked terrified. But there was a body, Imani. There was an autopsy. How? That's what we have to find out, I said. Someone is buried in that plot. I need to know who. I thought of Chloe, an old friend from medical school who worked in the pathology department. If anyone could tell me what happened in that morgue 8 years ago, it was her. We met Chloe at her house late that night. She was shocked to see me, but she listened. When I told her my theory that Cairo was alive, she didn't laugh. She went quiet. You know, Chloe said slowly, I actually remember that case. It was weird. The body was in bad shape, severe head trauma. And the identification wasn't done by you. It was done by his business partner. Maxwell Theron, I whispered. Right, Chloe nodded. But there was one detail I never forgot. The deceased had a tattoo on his chest. A small anchor with the word Seawolf. I froze. Cairo hated tattoos. He never had one in his life. Chloe stared at me. Imani, I recorded that tattoo in the protocol myself. If your husband didn't have ink, then the man on my table wasn't your husband. We had to be sure. Chloe agreed to sneak me into the hospital archives during her night shift at 2 a.m. Walking through the sterile, quiet corridors of the hospital felt like walking back into prison. We found case 127, Cairo Dio. I opened the folder with trembling hands. The photos were grainy, but there it was, the anchor tattoo on the chest of a dead stranger. I flipped to the intake forms. There was a small note attached. Transferred from municipal morgue to. Cause of death. Overdose. Identity. Unknown. The puzzle was finally complete. Cairo and Theron had found a John Doe, a homeless man who died of an overdose, and swapped his body for Cairo's while I was unconscious on the floor. I looked at the file of this poor, nameless man who had been buried under my husband's name for 8 years. I wasn't just fighting for my freedom anymore. I was fighting for his dignity too. I have the proof he's alive, I told Chloe, closing the folder. Now I just need to find where Alex Romano is hiding. I turned to Elena. We're going to need a private investigator. It's time to bring my husband back from the dead. While I was sewing prison uniforms for pennies an hour, my husband was building an empire on the Mediterranean coast. That's the thought that kept me awake at night. Finding out Cairo was alive was one thing. Finding out he had used my murder conviction as a stepping stone to paradise was another. I didn't just want justice anymore. I wanted to burn his perfect new life to the ground. We couldn't hunt a ghost alone. Elena introduced me to Naomi Ruiz, a private detective who specialized in finding people who didn't want to be found. She was expensive. And I was broken, but Elena loaned me the money without hesitation. 3 days later, Naomi threw a file on the table. Your Alex Romano is real, she said. But his birth certificate, his passport, all fake. High-quality forgeries, but fake. Where is he? I demanded. Naomi pulled out a photo. Antalya, Turkey. He owns a chain of high-end restaurants. He has a new wife, a local woman, and a son. I stared at the photo. Cairo looked older, tanned, happy. He had a son. He had replaced me, replaced his life, and erased his crimes, all while I sat in a cell wondering why he died. We have to force him back to the U.S., I said, my voice cold. If I go to the police now with just a theory, he'll disappear again. I remembered the letter from Theron we found, the one mentioning documents hidden in the grave. It was my only leverage. I picked up the phone and dialed the number for the Russian Courtyard restaurant in Turkey. Hello. A man's voice. It had an accent now, but I knew that timbre. It was the voice I used to wake up to. Hello, Cairo, I said. The silence on the other end was deafening. Then a shaky whisper. Who is this? Your wife. The one who served 8 years for your murder. He tried to play dumb, but I didn't let him. I know everything, Cairo. I know about the bank robbery. I know about the fake ID. And I know that in your grave lies a man with a seawolf tattoo. I could hear his breathing hitch. He was trapped. What do you want? He finally asked. I want you to come to New York. We meet, you sign a confession that you faked your death. And I give you the documents you hid in the grave. The ones Theron wrote about. It was a bluff. I knew the grave had already been emptied, but he didn't know that. You're crazy, he hissed. I'm not coming back. Then I send everything I have to Interpol and the Turkish police, I countered. Let's see how your new wife likes being married to a bank robber. He was silent for a long time. I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. Finally, he cracked. 2 days, he said. I'll meet you in New York. But Imani, if this is a trap, you won't live to regret it. He hung up. I put the phone down, my hands trembling. I had just summoned a man who had successfully faked his own death and framed me for murder. He was coming back, not for redemption but to protect his secrets. And I had a terrible feeling he wasn't coming alone. Seeing a ghost is terrifying. But sitting across a table from one while he drinks an espresso is infuriating. I had spent 8 years staring at a concrete wall, imagining what I would say to Cairo if I ever saw him again. I thought I would scream. I thought I would cry. But when the moment finally came, sitting in the middle of a crowded mall in New York City, I didn't feel anything but cold, hard focus. He wasn't my husband anymore. He was just a target and I wasn't going to miss. We couldn't take any risks. Naomi, our private investigator, insisted on a public location with high security. The Hudson Center Mall, she decided. Crowds, cameras, exits. I sat at a table near the window watching the escalator. Naomi was positioned in the corner, blending in with the shoppers, ready to call mall security if things went south. At exactly 2 p.m. he appeared. Cairo. He looked different. He was tanned, heavier, and wore an expensive suit that screamed money. But he had the same walk. The walk of a man who thought he owned the world. He sat down opposite me, keeping his sunglasses on. Hello, Imani, he said, his voice smooth. Prison didn't break you. Cut the small talk, I snapped. Why did you do it? He took off his glasses, rubbing his eyes tiredly. I had debts, Imani. Huge gambling debts. $1.5 million to the wrong people. They were going to kill me. And you. So you destroyed my life to save it? I asked, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. The plan was different, he insisted, leaning over the table. It was supposed to look like an accident. You were supposed to find the body and call the police. But Theron, he screwed up. He hit you too hard. When you woke up screaming and confused, the police assumed murder. We just let it happen. It was cleaner that way. Hearing him admit that he let me go to prison because it was cleaner made me want to flip the table. 8 years, Cairo. You let me rot for 8 years. I'm sorry, he muttered. Now, give me the documents from the grave. The ones from the letter. I slid the copy of the letter across the table. The one where Alex Romano discussed hiding evidence in the coffin. Cairo read it and frowned. This isn't mine, he said, looking confused. The signature looks like mine, but I didn't write this. I never hid anything in the grave. My mind raced. If Cairo didn't write the letter, then someone faked it to lure us here. Or to lure him here. Suddenly, Cairo started looking around, sweat breaking out on his forehead. I was followed, he whispered, panic rising in his voice. From Turkey. Someone knew I was coming. Before I could react, 2 shadows fell over our table. I looked up and my blood froze. It was them. The tall man with the mole on his cheek and the stocky man in the leather jacket. The same men who had poisoned Victor. Cairo Dio, the tall man smiled, showing too many teeth. What a small world. You owe us $50 million plus 8 years of interest. He placed a heavy hand on Cairo's shoulder. And this must be the wife. The one who killed you. We weren't negotiating anymore. We were trapped in the middle of a food court with professional killers. And I realized with horror that this wasn't just about Cairo's gambling debts. This was about the stolen bank money. And they weren't letting either of us leave until they got it. There is nothing more terrifying than a threat delivered with a smile in a crowded food court. The tall man with the mole didn't pull a gun. He didn't shout. He simply placed an envelope on the table and leaned in like an old friend. But the look in his eyes was dead enough to freeze the blood in my veins. I realized then that Cairo wasn't the mastermind I thought he was. He was just a pawn who had outlived his usefulness. We represent private investors in the Bank of the Americas, the tall man said softly. Investors who don't like publicity. You stole $50 million from them, Cairo. We want it back. Cairo was shaking. I don't have that kind of money. The restaurant makes a profit but not millions. That's your problem, the man shrugged. You have 2 weeks. If we don't get the money, we tell the Turkish police who Alex Romano really is. And then we tell the U.S. attorney where to find the dead man walking. They stood up and vanished into the crowd as quickly as they appeared, leaving us staring at the envelope. Cairo looked like he was going to vomit. They know everything, he whispered. They're going to kill me. I looked at my husband, the man I had hated for 8 years, and realized he was pathetic. He hadn't orchestrated this grand conspiracy alone. He wasn't smart enough. Listen to me, I said, grabbing his hand to stop it from trembling. We're going to make a deal. You help me prove my innocence, and I'll help you find the people who are actually pulling the strings. Cairo looked at me confused. What do you mean? Think, Cairo. The robbery plan was too perfect. The security codes, the timing. Maxwell Theron isn't a genius, and neither are you. Someone inside the bank set this up. He nodded slowly. You're right. Maxwell knew things about the alarm system he shouldn't have known. Like someone briefed him. Good, I said. Now first things first. You're going to sign a confession. We drove to a cheap motel on the outskirts of the city. I wasn't taking any chances. I made Cairo write out every detail of his fake death. And we got a notary to stamp it. No questions asked for the right price. Holding that piece of paper felt heavier than gold. It was my freedom. But I couldn't use it yet. If I went to the police now, the men in suits would kill Cairo before he could testify. And I'd be left with a piece of paper and a corpse. We regrouped with Naomi and Elena to dig into the bank's history. If someone inside helped them, there had to be a trail. Naomi found it in 2 days. It's the executives, she said, pulling up photos on her laptop. Garrett Fierro, the CEO, and Solange Casas, the head accountant. Both resigned 6 months after the robbery. Let me guess, I said. They're rich now. Filthy rich, Naomi smirked. Fierro is living in a mansion in Cyprus. Casas is at a private firm. And guess what? There are records of them meeting with Maxwell Theron before the heist. It all made sense. The CEO and the accountant planned the robbery of their own bank to steal from the stolen accounts. They used Cairo and Theron as the fall guys to do the dirty work. Now they were cleaning up loose ends. We have the confession, I said. But we need the link to the CEO. Naomi tapped the screen. I tracked down Maxwell Theron. He didn't just disappear. He's hiding in Montenegro under the name Mark Theron. I stood up. Pack your bags. We're going to Europe. If Theron wants to stay alive, he's going to tell us everything. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but justice? Justice is a fire that burns everything in its path until only the truth remains. Standing on a terrace in Belgrade, staring down the man who helped destroy my life, I realized I didn't want revenge anymore. I wanted peace. And peace required one final devastating blow to the people who thought they were untouchable. Maxwell Theron walked into the meeting looking like a hunted animal. He was terrified of Fierro and Casas, the powerful executives who had ordered the hit on us. I don't know if I should be doing this, Theron stammered. You have no choice, Maxwell, I told him. They tried to kill Cairo. They poisoned an innocent groundskeeper. You're next. Unless we strike first. Theron crumbled. He admitted everything. It was Fierro's plan from the start. Rob their own bank, frame a dying man and take the cash. But Theron was smarter than they thought. He had kept insurance recordings, emails and bank transfers proving Fierro and Casas pulled the strings. With Theron's evidence and Cairo's confession, we went to the district attorney. It was a coordinated strike. In the U.S., police arrested Fierro and Casas, dragging them out of their luxury lives in handcuffs. Their assets were frozen, their reputations shattered. Because they cooperated, Cairo and Theron received reduced sentences. But for Fierro and Casas, they were put away for a long, long time. And me? The court officially declared me innocent. They awarded me $8 million, $1 million for every stolen year of my life. It was a fortune, but looking at the check, all I could think about was the time I could never buy back. Money couldn't fix the past, but the truth could fix the future. I went back to the cemetery one last time. The name Cairo Dio was gone from the headstone. In its place was a new plaque, Dwayne Morales. We finally identified the man with the seawolf tattoo. He was a Navy veteran who had fallen on hard times and died alone. We found his mother, and for the first time in years, she had a place to mourn her son. That was the moment I finally felt free. I bought a studio apartment for Victor and Lumi near the cemetery, ensuring that little girl would never have to worry about her future again. Before Cairo left to serve his short sentence and return to his family in Turkey, we met one last time. "Forgive me," he said, eyes filled with regret. "I forgive you," I answered. "Not for you but for me. Go and live, Cairo. Truly live." I didn't keep the millions for myself. I used the money to open the Last Truth Center, a legal aid firm dedicated to freeing the wrongfully convicted. My first case, a man I met at the cemetery named Marcus King, whose wife was innocent just like I was. My friend Ayana once told me in prison that the truth always rises like oil on water. She was right. They buried me, but they forgot I was a seed. If this story moved you, if you believe that no matter how deep the darkness is, the light will eventually break through, hit that like button and subscribe. Share this story with someone who needs hope today. Because justice isn't just a luxury, it's a necessity. And we're just getting started.